The day the sky cried light. The night was uncomfortably still when Dr. Nathaniel Cross was jolted awake by a strange sound. It was not like anything he'd ever heard before, a low, resonating hum that seemed to vibrate through the very air, as though the world itself were holding its breath. He squinted at the old digital clock on his nightstand. 3:07 a.m. The numbers glowed a soft red, mocking him with their unnatural precision. Sitting up in his bed, Nathaniel's instincts kicked in. He was a man of science, a surgeon and a researcher who dealt with facts and logic, not strange nighttime noises. Yet this sound made his skin crawl in a way he couldn't explain. Throwing on his slippers, he grabbed his phone to record it. Might as well capture something for the news, he muttered. But as soon as he hit record, everything changed. A blinding light burst through his bedroom window, flooding the room in a cascade of white brilliance, so pure it hurt to look at. Nathaniel shielded his eyes with his forearm, heart pounding in his chest like a drumbeat. For a moment, he thought the light would pass. It did not. Instead, the air grew impossibly thick, pressing against him with an invisible force, and his body suddenly felt weightless, like he was falling without moving. Before he could process what was happening, everything went black. Nathaniel woke with a start, his head pounding as though he'd been hit with a sledgehammer. He groaned, blinking against the pale glow that surrounded him. Slowly, reality began to crystallize. He wasn't in his bedroom anymore. He was in a large, sterile chamber. The walls were smooth and metallic, gently pulsing with an otherworldly blue light that seemed almost alive. "What the hell?" Nathaniel croaked, sitting up on a platform that resembled a bed but had no visible seams. It was soft and unnervingly warm, like it had been made to mimic a living thing. Looking down, he realized he was wearing a fitted garment made of sleek silver material. "Not mine," he muttered. Then he froze. Across the room stood a figure, tall, impossibly elegant, and undeniably alien. Her skin shimmered like liquid sapphire, the color shifting subtly as she moved. Her eyes were elongated and glowing, their violet irises holding both intelligence and something far more dangerous. Silver threads of hair cascaded down her back, moving as though caught in an unseen breeze. The alien stepped forward, her voice clear, melodic, and tinged with authority. "You are awake, human." Nathaniel's throat dried. "What is this? Where am I?" "You are aboard the vessel Ilianus, far from your primitive Earth." She tilted her head slightly, studying him as though he were an oddity in a museum. "You are Nathaniel Cross, are you not? The esteemed human surgeon and genetic researcher." Nathaniel stared, mind reeling. How did they know his name? His work? Questions piled up, but his instincts screamed one thing. He needed to keep calm. "I'm a doctor, yes. But who are you? And why am I here?" The alien's gaze darkened slightly, though her expression remained unreadable. "I am Commander Zura of the Velari Dominion. You have been brought here to fulfill a task your kind would call impossible." Nathaniel barked a humorless laugh, though his heart hammered in his chest. Kidnapping a surgeon in the middle of the night isn't a great start if you're asking for help. Zura stepped closer, her ethereal beauty more unsettling up close. "Your survival depends on your success, human. The Velari Queen suffers from a fatal genetic affliction that is beyond the understanding of our greatest minds. Our healers cannot cure her." Nathaniel narrowed his eyes. "And you think I can?" Zura's expression grew colder, the violet glow of her eyes intensifying. "You are humanity's finest in this field. Your species' primitive biology and ingenuity are precisely why you were chosen." Nathaniel frowned, processing her words. "Wait, you think human biology is the answer? That's ridiculous." Her gaze locked onto his, a challenge simmering beneath the surface. "Is it? Earth has long been observed. Despite your species' relative weakness, you have proven resilient, adaptive, creative. These are qualities the Velari cannot replicate." Nathaniel stared at her, equal parts awestruck and furious. So you abduct me because your people couldn't do the job. You misunderstand, Doctor. Zura's voice dropped to a near whisper, chilling the air. Your compliance is not optional. Failure will not be tolerated. The gravity of the situation slammed into him like a freight train. He wasn't being asked to help. He was being ordered. Nathaniel's defiance flared up. And if I refuse? Zura tilted her head again, this time with a slow, unnerving smile. Then you will cease to exist. But do not mistake this for cruelty. It is necessity. Nathaniel spent the next several hours in silent observation, transported to a sprawling laboratory that looked like something ripped out of a sci-fi epic. The technology, though unrecognizable, was leagues beyond anything Earth had. Yet, despite the marvels surrounding him, his mind churned with unanswered questions. Why him? Why Earth? And most importantly, what exactly was this affliction that Valeri healers couldn't fix? The moment he saw the Queen's medical data, his doubts deepened. Holographic images displayed molecular structures and genetic pathways more advanced than anything he'd ever seen. Yet beneath the alien complexity, Nathaniel recognized something hauntingly familiar: genetic decay. The Queen's cells were breaking down, unable to regenerate properly. She's deteriorating, Nathaniel muttered, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear. This isn't just an illness, it's a design flaw. A Valeri scientist, taller and more rigid than Zura, scoffed. Your primitive understanding of genetics will not save her. Nathaniel shot him a glare. Your advanced understanding hasn't saved her either. So maybe it's time to shut up and let me work. The alien scientist bristled but fell silent. Nathaniel turned back to the holographic display, mind whirring as he considered his options. He needed to isolate the failing genetic markers, determine their root cause, and repair them. Somehow. But as he stared at the data, an unsettling thought gnawed at him. What if this disease wasn't natural at all? Zura appeared hours later, her presence filling the room. Progress. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, exhaustion creeping into his voice. You said failure isn't an option, Commander. But before I succeed, you need to tell me everything. Her glowing violet eyes met his, unflinching. What do you mean? Nathaniel stood, jaw set. I'm starting to think your queen isn't sick because of bad luck. This feels deliberate, engineered. And if you want me to save her, I need to know the truth. The room fell silent. For the first time, Nathaniel saw something flicker across Zura's face. It was fear. The Queen's secret. Nathaniel's words hung in the sterile air like a thunderclap, his accusation daring to pierce the illusion of control. Commander Zura didn't move, but the faint glow of the laboratory screens reflected off her silver hair, making her look otherworldly. Her violet eyes narrowed slightly, but there was no anger, just a quiet intensity Nathaniel hadn't seen before. What are you implying, Dr. Cross? Zura's voice was steady, but there was tension beneath it. Nathaniel folded his arms, his frustration mounting. I'm saying this disease doesn't add up. The genetic decay I've seen. It's not random. It's targeted, like someone broke it on purpose. The alien scientists around him froze, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Nathaniel caught it, fear, maybe even guilt. He turned back to Zura. You know something, don't you? If you want me to fix this, I need the whole picture. What are you not telling me? For a long moment, the room was silent. Then Zura spoke softly, her voice carrying an edge of regret. This knowledge is not given lightly, human. She waved a hand, and the glowing symbols around the lab shifted. A holographic projection of a planet appeared, vast and shimmering, surrounded by rings of light. Nathaniel stared at the image, recognizing its beauty yet sensing the destruction hidden within. This is Valerian, Zura said. Our homeworld. Millennia ago, our people sought perfection, immortality through genetic engineering. The Queen's lineage, the Airlith, were crafted to be the pinnacle of our race. Flawless, eternal. Nathaniel frowned. If they're so perfect, why is the queen dying? Zura's eyes flickered, the truth heavy in her tone. Because we interfered too much. The airlith were designed to be untouchable, their biology resistant to disease, age, even time itself. But perfection has a price. Over generations, their DNA began to decay. Slowly, invisibly, until now. Nathaniel stared at the projection, piecing the story together. You're saying her body can't repair itself because it was engineered to be unbreakable. Zura gave a solemn nod. An irony of our arrogance. The more we sought to control nature, the more fragile we became. Now the queen's condition threatens not just her, but the survival of our entire dominion. If she dies, the airlith line ends, and with it, our rule. The queen's secret. Nathaniel's words hung in the sterile air like a thunderclap, his accusation daring to pierce the illusion of control. Commander Zura didn't move, but the faint glow of the laboratory screens reflected off her silver hair, making her look otherworldly. Her violet eyes narrowed slightly. But there was no anger, just a quiet intensity Nathaniel hadn't seen before. What are you implying, Dr. Cross? Zura's voice was steady, but there was tension beneath it. Nathaniel folded his arms, his frustration mounting. I'm saying this disease doesn't add up. The genetic decay I've seen. It's not random. It's targeted, like someone broke it on purpose. The alien scientists around him froze, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Nathaniel caught it, fear, maybe even guilt. He turned back to Zura. You know something, don't you? If you want me to fix this, I need the whole picture. What are you not telling me? For a long moment, the room was silent. Then Zura spoke softly, her voice carrying an edge of regret. This knowledge is not given lightly, human. She waved a hand, and the glowing symbols around the lab shifted. A holographic projection of a planet appeared, vast and shimmering, surrounded by rings of light. Nathaniel stared at the image, recognizing its beauty yet sensing the destruction hidden within. This is Valerian, Zura said. Our homeworld. Millennia ago, our people sought perfection, immortality through genetic engineering. The Queen's lineage, the airlith, were crafted to be the pinnacle of our race. Flawless, eternal. Nathaniel frowned. If they're so perfect, why is the Queen dying? Zura's eyes flickered, the truth heavy in her tone. Because we interfered too much. The airlith were designed to be untouchable, their biology resistant to disease, age, even time itself. But perfection has a price. Over generations, their DNA began to decay. Slowly, invisibly, until now. Nathaniel stared at the projection, piecing the story together. You're saying her body can't repair itself because it was engineered to be unbreakable. Zura gave a solemn nod. An irony of our arrogance. The more we sought to control nature, the more fragile we became. Now the Queen's condition threatens not just her, but the survival of our entire dominion. If she dies, the airlith line ends, and with it, our rule. Nathaniel rubbed a hand over his face, the weight of it settling in. And you brought me here because humans haven't overwritten themselves like this yet. You think I can bridge the gap between your biology and natural healing? Yes, Zura said simply. We are out of time, and you are our only hope. Nathaniel sighed heavily, the burden settling squarely on his shoulders. He glanced back at the data, the swirling strands of Valari DNA that pulsed like a heartbeat on the screen. His mind was already racing through possibilities. Fine, but I'll need full access to her genetic data and her blood samples. If you got anything from her ancestors, I need that too. I can't rebuild her DNA without a baseline to compare it to. Zura hesitated for the briefest moment before nodding. You will have everything you require. Hours later, Nathaniel stood alone in his private laboratory, surrounded by alien machinery that hummed softly in the background. Samples of the Queen's blood floated in glass-like vials, glowing faintly under the sterile blue lights. On a nearby monitor, her DNA strand spun endlessly, a vast, intricate structure, yet fragile in its imperfection. "This is going to be impossible," Nathaniel muttered to himself, though his fingers were already tapping commands into the holographic console. He could feel the pressure mounting, every second ticking away like a countdown to his own demise. Yet, as a doctor, he had faced impossible situations before. He would figure it out. He loaded the Queen's genetic data alongside the fragments of ancestral DNA Zura had provided. The holograms displayed the comparison: ancient strands of code, intact and elegant, next to the fractured and unraveling structure that belonged to the Queen. Nathaniel squinted, his brow furrowing. This doesn't match. The Queen's DNA was failing, but not entirely because of natural decay. There were gaps, irregularities that looked suspiciously like they had been removed. Someone, maybe generations ago, had intentionally altered the Airlith lineage. Nathaniel's mind raced. Why would they do this? Before he could dig deeper, the door to the lab slid open with a soft hiss. Zura entered, her gaze sharp as she regarded him. Progress. Nathaniel turned, holding up one of the holographic strands. This wasn't just genetic decay. Someone tampered with her DNA. They stripped out entire sections, probably to keep her lineage pure, but they broke it in the process. Zura's face remained unreadable, though her silence spoke volumes. "You already knew, didn't you?" Nathaniel pressed. "Your people did this to themselves. This isn't a disease. It's sabotage." Zura stepped forward, her voice measured. "The Airlith were created to lead us, Doctor. Perfection was a necessity for survival in our galaxy. What was done was a mistake of hubris, but we cannot change the past." Nathaniel gritted his teeth, frustration bubbling to the surface. You can't just undo generations of genetic tampering. It's like trying to rebuild a broken bridge while the river's washing it away. "And yet you will try," Zura replied, her tone soft but unyielding. Nathaniel stared at her, the weight of the task pressing against his chest. He wasn't sure if he was being driven by fear, compassion, or sheer human stubbornness. But one thing was certain: failure wasn't an option. "I'll need to craft a synthetic enzyme to restore the missing genetic pathways," he said finally, turning back to the monitors. "It's risky. Her body might reject it. I can't guarantee anything." Zura regarded him silently before saying, "Do whatever is necessary. You will have our resources, but remember, Doctor, her survival ensures yours." Nathaniel didn't reply. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves, eyes fixed on the swirling DNA strands that represented both hope and devastation. "Then let's get to work." The clockwork heart of survival. Nathaniel Cross hadn't slept in days. He sat slumped in the center of the laboratory, surrounded by glowing monitors, vials of alien blood, and faint hums of machinery that never seemed to rest. His fingers tapped frantically at the holographic console as he refined the synthetic enzyme strand he was crafting, a potential lifeline for the dying Thalari Queen. Come on," he muttered under his breath. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and exhaustion gnawed at the edges of his mind. But he pushed it aside. He couldn't stop. If he did, he would fail. And if he failed, there would be no mercy. He glanced at the countdown timer projected on the far wall, a feature Zura had insisted on installing. 4 days left. Suddenly, the console buzzed, and the enzyme simulation failed again. Nathaniel cursed under his breath, slamming his palm against the sleek surface. "You've got to be kidding me. What am I missing?" His eyes darted back to the Queen's holographic DNA strand. It was like trying to fix a clock while blindfolded, every gear spinning out of sync. The problem wasn't just repairing her broken code. It was making sure her body wouldn't destroy the repair as a foreign invader. A noise behind him snapped his attention away. The door hissed open, and Zura entered, her violet eyes sharp and unrelenting as always. She strode across the room, her presence commanding as though she belonged in every space she stepped into. "You've been awake for too long," she said, the faintest edge of concern in her otherwise controlled tone. Nathaniel leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. "You think sleep's going to save her? Because I don't." Zura tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You are human, fragile. Your body cannot endure this pace." "Yeah, well, you're running out of time. I don't see your people stepping in to help," Nathaniel snapped. His frustration had grown like a storm cloud over the past few days, and he was no longer bothering to hide it. Zura didn't flinch. "Our knowledge cannot solve this. Your defiance, your desperation, gives you a strength we do not possess." Nathaniel stared at her. For the first time, there was no mockery in her words. She meant it. "That's a nice sentiment," he replied gruffly, turning back to his work. "But desperation isn't going to fix broken DNA. I need an anchor, something stable in her biology to build from. Otherwise, the enzyme's useless." Zura hesitated, something flickering across her face. "There is another option." Nathaniel froze. Slowly, he turned to face her. "What option?" Zura took a step closer, her voice low. "The Valeri possess something we call the Alum Key, a remnant of our ancient experiments. It is dangerous, but it holds fragments of the original airlift code." Nathaniel's brows furrowed. "Wait, you've had this the whole time. And you're just telling me now." "It is not that simple, Dr. Cross," Zura said sharply. "The key is unstable. To use it would be to walk a razor's edge. It could destroy the Queen entirely, or worse." Nathaniel stood abruptly, his exhaustion forgotten. "Worse? You mean it could kill her faster?" Zura's gaze hardened. "No, it could destroy you. The Alum Key interfaces with the genetic structure of whoever wields it. If you are not compatible, it will tear you apart. The Valeri were designed to withstand its influence. You were not." Nathaniel let her words hang in the air for a moment, weighing the risk. His chest felt heavy, but he already knew the answer. "If it gives me a shot at saving her, I'll take it." Zura's eyes widened slightly, though she quickly masked her surprise. "You would gamble your life for this?" Nathaniel let out a bitter laugh. "You already kidnapped me and threatened my survival if I fail. I'm just upgrading the stakes." Zura regarded him quietly before nodding. "Very well. The Alum Key will be brought to you. But do not forget, Doctor, once you begin, there is no turning back." The Alum Key was unlike anything Nathaniel had ever seen. It wasn't a physical key, but a crystalline sphere that pulsed faintly, like it was alive. It hovered in the air above a pedestal in a secured chamber, the energy radiating from it making his skin prickle with unease. Two Valeri scientists flanked him, though they kept their distance. Zura stood nearby, her expression unreadable. "What do I do?" Nathaniel asked, his voice low. Zura gestured toward the key. "You must interface with it. Touch the key and allow it to synchronize with you. It will attempt to adapt to your biology. And if it doesn't?" Zura's violet eyes met his. "Then you will not survive." Nathaniel swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. No turning back. He stepped forward, the hum of the key growing louder with every step. The energy radiating from it felt almost electric, as though the air around it was alive. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the surface. The moment his fingers made contact, a blinding light burst from the sphere, flooding the chamber. Nathaniel gasped as searing heat shot through his body, every nerve in his system igniting at once. He staggered but couldn't pull away. The key had him now. Images flashed through his mind. Ancient cities of glass and light, vast skies filled with ships that pierced the heavens. He saw the Valeri as they once were, proud, brilliant, perfect. Then the destruction came. Shattered worlds, broken DNA strands unraveling like threads in a storm. The key was showing him everything. Nathaniel gritted his teeth, fighting the overwhelming surge of information. His muscles spasmed, his knees buckling. Somewhere in the haze of pain, he heard Zura shout something, but it was drowned out by the roar of the key in his mind. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the light vanished. Nathaniel collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. His entire body ached, but he was alive. "Doctor." Zura was kneeling beside him, her voice urgent. "Did it work?" Nathaniel blinked, his vision swimming. Slowly, he looked up at the hovering key, now silent and dim. I think it gave me what I need," he croaked. Zura's expression shifted, relief, maybe even awe, but she masked it quickly. "Then you must act quickly. The Queen's time is nearly gone." Nathaniel pushed himself up, his hands still trembling. His mind buzzed with the knowledge the key had given him. New pathways, new answers. It was as though he could see the Queen's DNA in its entirety now. Every broken strand, every missing piece. For the first time, he felt a flicker of hope. "Let's save her," he said, voice resolute. The fractured bond. Nathaniel Cross sat at the heart of the laboratory, his mind alight with the echoes of knowledge the Elam key had burned into him. The crystalline sphere had unleashed something raw and ancient into his thoughts, a tapestry of genetic truth, so vast it was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The Queen's DNA spun on the holographic display before him, no longer a hopeless tangle but a puzzle whose solution now gleamed within his reach. He moved with renewed focus, his hands gliding across the alien console as he manipulated strands of glowing code. The enzyme, his key to repairing her fractured biology, was finally taking shape. "Come on," Nathaniel whispered, his exhaustion buried beneath sheer determination. The timer on the far wall continued its relentless countdown. 2 days left. The door hissed open. He didn't have to look up to know it was Zura. Her presence carried an unspoken weight, the kind that made the air feel thicker when she entered her room. "You have not left this chamber," she said quietly. "Didn't plan to," Nathaniel replied, his eyes fixed on the screens. "Every second counts." She approached, her silver hair catching the soft blue light. "The Elam key did not destroy you." It was not a question, more like an observation laced with curiosity. Nathaniel paused, fingers hovering over the console. "Yeah, I noticed that too. Seems like your key found something compatible about me after all." He turned to face her, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Guess I'm just lucky. Or cursed." Zura studied him with an intensity that made Nathaniel shift uncomfortably. "The key adapts to strength of will. It does not bow to the unworthy." Nathaniel scoffed. "Strength?" It felt more like my brain was melting. She allowed the faintest curve of a smile, something so fleeting Nathaniel thought he might have imagined it. Perhaps both are true. He shook his head and turned back to his work, his tone hardening. "If I'm so strong, maybe you can tell me why your people hid the truth about the Airlith's DNA. Why sabotage your own queen?" Zura stiffened slightly, the glow in her violet eyes dimming. It was not sabotage, it was survival. Nathaniel froze mid-motion, his head snapping toward her. Survival. She hesitated, but the weight of the question hung between them. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft, but edged with centuries of regret. "Long ago, the Airlith were not only our leaders. They were our balance. The purity of their line maintained harmony among the Velari. But purity comes at a cost. The Airlith grew too perfect, too isolated. Their genes became brittle, unable to evolve, unable to adapt. To save our dominion, our ancestors made a choice. They altered the Airlith code to force dependence, a need for the greater dominion to sustain them." Nathaniel stared at her, stunned. "You built a genetic leash into your rulers." "It was necessary," Zura replied, her voice firm but pained. "Without it, the Airlith would have become gods, untouchable. But in time, the balance tipped too far. The bond that kept them strong is now killing our queen." Nathaniel let out a slow breath, his fists clenching at his sides. "So that's why you're here now. To fix the sins of your ancestors." "Yes." He turned back to the display, his jaw set. "Well, you've got more problems than you think. The Queen's body isn't just failing because of the broken DNA. It's rejecting her existence. Her cells are trapped in a loop, trying to repair themselves with corrupted instructions." Zura stepped closer, her voice calm but urgent. "Can you repair her?" Nathaniel exhaled sharply, his green eyes reflecting the swirling data on the screen. "Maybe. But the solution won't just fix her. It'll break that leash you built. She'll be independent again, biologically." Zura blinked, and for the first time, Nathaniel saw hesitation flicker in her glowing eyes. "That is dangerous." Nathaniel narrowed his eyes at her. "You said you wanted me to save her. Now you're worried about losing control." "The Dominion depends on balance, Doctor," Zura replied sharply. "If the Queen becomes untethered, she could choose to abandon us." Nathaniel spun to face her fully, anger flaring in his chest. "You'd rather let her die than give her freedom." Zura stared at him, unflinching. "Freedom and survival are not always the same, human." "Well, that's not your decision to make anymore." Nathaniel turned back to the enzyme formula, his voice cold. "I'm fixing her, whether you like it or not." Hours later, the enzyme was ready. It glowed faintly in a containment vial, its shimmering liquid holding the culmination of Nathaniel's knowledge, determination, and the stolen secrets of the Valeri. He held it carefully, the weight of the moment settling over him. 2 guards flanked Zura as they escorted Nathaniel into the Queen's chamber. The room was vast, cathedral-like in its design, with walls of shifting gold and light. At its center lay the Queen, still and silent on an elevated platform. Her skin, once radiant, had dulled to a faint glow, and her breathing was shallow. Nathaniel swallowed hard. Seeing her now made the stakes feel real in a way they hadn't before. "Do you understand what you are about to do?" Zura asked quietly as they approached the platform. Nathaniel nodded, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "Yeah, I'm saving her." He approached the Queen, every step echoing like a drumbeat. Gently, he inserted the enzyme into a sleek device attached to her wrist, an alien medical apparatus that pulsed faintly in rhythm with her fading heartbeat. The enzyme began to flow into her veins, glowing as it traveled beneath her skin. The effect was immediate. The Queen's body tensed, her eyes snapping open to reveal swirling violet light. Energy erupted across the chamber like a shockwave, forcing Nathaniel to stumble backward. "Is it working?" Zura shouted above the roar of power that filled the room. Nathaniel shielded his eyes, his voice tight. "I don't know." The Queen's breathing quickened as the energy intensified, her body glowing brighter and brighter, until the entire room seemed to vibrate with her presence. Nathaniel watched, breathless, as her skin began to heal, its luster returning as though life itself was pouring back into her. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the light vanished. The room fell silent. The Queen sat up, her gaze locking onto Nathaniel. For a moment, he swore the world itself paused. "You," she whispered, her voice melodic and powerful. "You have freed me." Nathaniel exhaled, relief flooding his body. "Yeah, I guess I did." But as her violet eyes narrowed, a chill ran down his spine. "And now," she said softly, "I must decide what comes next." The Queen's awakening. The chamber was silent, the air thick with a tension that seemed to pulse like a living thing. Nathaniel Cross stood frozen as the Queen of the Valeri, restored, radiant, and terrifying, sat upright on her platform. Her violet eyes glowed with renewed power, twin stars in the vast cathedral-like space. "You have freed me," she said again, her voice echoing through the hall like the chime of a bell. Nathaniel swallowed hard. His mind screamed at him to back away, to do anything but stand in the line of that gaze, yet he held firm. "I did what you needed," he said carefully, his voice steady but cautious. "I repaired the damage. You're going to live." The Queen tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You are different," she murmured. "I see the light of the Alum key within you, Dr. Cross. It has marked you." Nathaniel felt a cold chill run down his spine. "Marked me?" Zura stepped forward, her voice sharp with urgency. "Your Majesty, you are weakened. You must rest." The Queen's gaze snapped to Zura with such intensity that even the stoic commander faltered. "Do not command me, Zura. I have been trapped in the shadow of my ancestors' failures long enough." Nathaniel could see it, the flicker of defiance in the Queen's expression. It wasn't just power she had regained, it was independence, and it burned like wildfire in her eyes. "Your Majesty," Nathaniel said, daring to interrupt. "I don't know what's happened, but I stabilized your DNA. That's it. You're free of the biological leash. Free of chains I did not choose," she finished, cutting him off. She stood, her presence filling the room as if the walls themselves bowed to her will. Her obsidian skin shimmered like polished starlight, her silver hair flowing as though caught in an unseen breeze. Nathaniel couldn't help but take a step back. The Queen was no longer dying. She was reborn. "What happens now?" he asked cautiously. The Queen's gaze softened as she looked at him. "Now, Doctor, I reclaim what is mine. The Velari Dominion will know that their Queen has returned, and no longer will I be a prisoner to their design." Zura stepped forward again, her voice urgent and trembling on the edge of control. "Your Majesty, you must understand. Breaking the bond risks everything. Our survival depends on unity." The Queen's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. "And yet, Commander, that unity was built on lies. I will not allow my people to wither under the weight of ancient arrogance any longer. If they cannot adapt, they do not deserve to endure." Nathaniel's stomach twisted. He'd heard this tone before, prideful, resolute, and unstoppable. The Queen wasn't just alive. She was determined to remake the Velari in her image. "You're talking about tearing everything down," Nathaniel said, his voice low but firm. "They'd brought me here to save you, but I didn't sign up for whatever this is." The Queen turned back to him, her glowing gaze locking onto his. "Do you not see, Dr. Cross? You are the reason I stand here. Your mind, your defiance, your very humanity has given me what the Velari could not, a second chance. I owe you much." "Great," Nathaniel muttered. "I'm thrilled to be part of your revolution." The Queen smiled, and something about it made his chest tighten. "You misunderstand, Doctor. You are no mere part. You are now bound to me by law." Nathaniel blinked. "Wait, what?" Zura's eyes widened, her calm facade cracking. "Your Majesty, you cannot mean." "I do," the Queen interrupted, her voice ringing with finality. She stepped forward, each movement a command of the space around her. "The bond forged by saving my life is sacred among the Velari. By law, Nathaniel Cross is now my mate." The words hit Nathaniel like a sledgehammer. He stared at her, mouth agape, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Mate? What mate? That wasn't part of the deal. Zura looked equally stunned. "Your Majesty, he is human. This cannot." "It can," the Queen said, her tone unyielding. "It has been decided by the bond itself." Nathaniel stumbled backward, his thoughts spiraling. Mate? What did that even mean here? Was he married to an alien now? Was he supposed to rule alongside her? The thought was absurd. "This is insane," he muttered, shaking his head. "I didn't ask for any of this." The Queen's gaze softened slightly as she regarded him. "And yet here you stand, a human, defying limits you were never meant to overcome. You have saved me, Nathaniel Cross, and in return, you will walk beside me as we shape a new dominion." Nathaniel felt the weight of her words crash over him like a tidal wave. He had come here unwillingly, thrust into a nightmare of alien science and impossible odds, All he had wanted was to survive and go home. Now he was being bound to a queen on the verge of rewriting her entire world. "You're asking me to be something I'm not," he said quietly. "I'm not a leader. I'm not your mate. I'm just a doctor." The queen stepped closer, her radiant energy enveloping him like sunlight. "You are more than you believe, Nathaniel Cross. You have already proven it. You will not stand alone in this." Zura's voice broke through the tension, hard and sharp. "Your Majesty, this is a mistake." The queen's gaze snapped back to Zura, her expression regal and unrelenting. "The only mistake was believing that perfection would save us. I choose the path forward, Commander. If you cannot accept that, then leave." Zura's jaw clenched, but she stepped back, her silence an act of obedience. Nathaniel stood there, his mind racing, his chest tight with uncertainty. The queen's words echoed in his head, louder than the hum of the alien machinery around him. He wasn't ready for this. He hadn't asked for any of it. But as the queen turned back to him, her eyes glowing with a promise of both power and change, he realized something chilling. It no longer mattered what he wanted. The Valari queen had chosen him, and whether he liked it or not, the future of an entire species now rested on his shoulders. The rising storm. Nathaniel Cross had been dragged through the unimaginable over the past few days, but as he stood in the shadow of the Valari queen, his supposed mate by alien law, he felt the weight of reality hit him harder than ever before. A doctor pulled from Earth, thrown into a dying alien empire, now bound to a ruler who planned to rewrite the very fabric of her people. In the silence that followed the queen's declaration, Nathaniel's voice broke through like a crack of thunder. "You don't understand," he said, his tone low but resolute. "I'm not one of you. I don't belong here, and I sure as hell don't want to play king in some alien empire." The queen regarded him with a serene calm that sent a chill down his spine. "And yet, the bond has been sealed. It is no longer a matter of desire, Nathaniel Cross. It is destiny." Nathaniel let out a bitter laugh, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "Destiny? You call this destiny? I was dragged here against my will to fix a problem your people created. Now you want to chain me to this." He gestured broadly at the golden cathedral of a chamber, "and pretend I belong." Zura, who stood near the edge of the room, said nothing. She watched Nathaniel with the sharp, assessing gaze of someone calculating her next move, her loyalty teetering on the edge of doubt. "Enough," the queen said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You think yourself unworthy, but you have proven otherwise. Your humanity, your strength, was the key to my rebirth." Nathaniel shook his head. "This isn't about me. It's about you. What happens when your people reject you? What happens when they see what I've done? What you've become?" The queen's expression darkened ever so slightly. "Then they will learn. Adapt. Or perish." Her words carried a chilling finality that made Nathaniel's stomach twist. Nathaniel retreated to the lab hours later, exhaustion clinging to him like a second skin. The queen's power was rising, and the tension in the Dominion was growing heavier by the minute. Even as he sat alone, surrounded by faintly glowing machines, he could feel the storm gathering outside the ship's walls. The Valari would not accept change quietly. He knew that much. "Think, Nathaniel," he muttered, pacing back and forth. The situation was spinning out of control, and he had no idea how to stop it. Fixing the queen's DNA had seemed like a victory, but it was quickly turning into something far worse, a spark that could ignite an empire-wide rebellion. The door to the lab slid open suddenly, breaking his chain of thought. Zura entered, her silver hair flowing behind her like a shroud. "You should not be alone, Dr. Cross," she said quietly. Nathaniel turned sharply to face her. "Alone is the only place I can think straight, Commander." Zura studied him for a long moment, her expression uncharacteristically soft. "You are afraid." "Afraid?" Nathaniel let out a short, humorless laugh. "Of course I'm afraid. Your queen has declared me her mate and the key to her empire's survival, and I've got an entire species that probably wants me dead because of it." Zura's gaze did not waver. "The queen's decision has fractured the Dominion. There are already whispers of rebellion. Many will refuse to accept you." Nathaniel's stomach dropped. "Great. That makes me feel so much better." Zura stepped closer, her voice lowering. "You misunderstand me. I do not tell you this to frighten you. I tell you this so you may prepare." Nathaniel's frustration boiled over. "Prepare for what? I didn't ask for this. I'm not a leader. I'm not a hero. I'm a guy who patches people up, not someone who saves empires." Zura stared at him for a long moment, and then, to his surprise, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "And yet you have done both." Nathaniel blinked, stunned into silence. "The queen sees what you refuse to," Zura continued. "Humanity's strength lies not in its power but in its adaptability. You repaired what we believed to be irreparable. You saved her. That is why she chose you." Nathaniel looked away, his thoughts spinning. "And what if I fail her? What if this whole thing comes crashing down?" "Then you will face it," Zura said simply, "because that is what you do." The storm came the next day. Nathaniel stood in the observation chamber, staring out at the swirling nebula through the massive glass-like panels. Beyond the ship, the Valari fleet gathered, a spectacle of golden vessels, their lights piercing the dark void of space. "Something's happening," Nathaniel muttered, his gut twisting with unease. Moments later, alarms blared across the ship, and Zura's voice echoed through the comms. "Prepare for impact. Enemy forces have breached the outer defenses." Nathaniel's chest tightened. Rebellion. He raced through the halls, dodging Valari guards and soldiers as they rushed to their positions. The ship rocked violently, and energy blasts lit up the corridors with flashes of white and red. It was chaos. Nathaniel burst into the central chamber where the queen sat on her throne, surrounded by shimmering energy that pulsed like a heartbeat. Her gaze was steady, unfazed by the violence unfolding around her. "You need to stop this," Nathaniel shouted as he approached. "Your people are turning on you." The queen's eyes glowed brighter. "They'd resist change, Dr. Cross. It is to be expected." "Expected? They're fighting you," he roared. "You can't just tear down everything they've known overnight. You need to give them a reason to follow you, not fear you." The queen regarded him carefully. "And what would you suggest, human?" Nathaniel took a deep breath, his mind racing. "Let me speak to them. Let me show them that you're not their end. You're their future." Zura, who had entered behind him, stepped forward. "It is too dangerous, Your Majesty. The human's presence has already caused unrest." The queen's gaze remained locked on Nathaniel, as if measuring his soul. Finally, she nodded. "Then you shall speak." Nathaniel stared at her, wide-eyed. "What? You wish to prove yourself, Nathaniel Cross. So you will." Before he could argue, the queen raised her hand. A holographic interface materialized in the air, casting his image across the Dominion fleet. His voice carried to ships, soldiers, and rebels alike. Nathaniel stepped forward, the weight of thousands of lives pressing against him. He swallowed hard and took a shaky breath. "My name is Nathaniel Cross," he began, his voice echoing through the comms. "I'm human. I'm not one of you, and I never asked to be here. But I came anyway. I stood in your laboratories, faced your impossible problems, and did what no one else could. I saved your queen." He looked straight into the projection, his green eyes blazing with resolve. "Your people wanted perfection, but perfection broke you. Now it's time to adapt. Your queen is alive not because of her power, but because she chose a new path. She chose change." The room was silent as his words spread through the fleet. Nathaniel turned to face the queen, his voice low but firm. "Lead them with hope," he said, "or you'll lose them all." The queen sat in silence, her violet gaze softening as the distant sounds of battle began to fade. For the first time, the storm seemed to quiet.